the comment section, everyone. Smiley face for Brooks, crying face.
Brooks is a
Rachel,
theist,
everyone.
but
Thank you so much for the unicorn. You're awesome, you guys. I
This is
appreciate y'all
crazy.
for the love. Thank you so much,
Brooks
Rachel.
is
It's so good to
mugging,
see
bro,
you.
I'll
I
be
hope you're
honest.
doing well.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more even now. Yo, Maze, thank you for the unicorn. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. W Maze in the comment section as well. Thank you very much. Yeah, it seems a lot more even now, so
Right,
people
so,
are
like,
joining in.
Real quick, gifts are cool, but would it be cool if do we need to say like thanks for this? I'm not saying
No,
like that's.
I'm thinking during the debate
Oh,
what we
yeah, I
do
won't.
Okay,
is we
cool.
could just kind of ignore them and take a
Okay.
mental note,
Okay.
and then like
Let's write down,
periodically-
and then at the end, we're going to go over all the donations, everyone. So
Yeah,
we
actually,
will
Parker,
write that down.
Would you like to do that? Or like we could
Will
get
I be able
like,
to
some
write down
third party?
y'all's? I could try.
we could
Or
get some third
could you guys,
parties.
yeah, like a third party for each side to do that? Because I'm going to have to do it for mine as well. So,
Yeah, that is a big job.
Dakota, thank you for the $10 on Cash App. Thank you so much, Dakota.
All right.
Matt will cover you, Dean.
Awesome.
Brooks, do you have anyone that could cover you? If not, I can try.
I want to
no,
make sure I think
but-
everyone.
I mean, I'm not too worried about it if you don't get them.
Okay, for sure. I'll try to.
Awesome.
I'll try to. All right, everyone. We're going to be starting the debate here in about 1 minute. Again, the debate is: does the Christian God exist? Again, with Brooks and Dean. Y'all have probably seen the the drama preceding this. If you have, do make sure to tap that screen, share the live to a few friends who might have known about it, as it's going to be starting here in about 1 minute. So again, if you do want to see the debate, make sure to do that. Again, you can support us through the various ways we just mentioned. But all right, everyone, I'm going to give it away to Brooks to start with the opening statement. Zessen, thank you for the $5. And Steph, thank you for the subscription. Go for it.
Take it away,
Okay.
Brooks.
All right, sounds good, Dean. I appreciate you being here, and I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to be here. I would just say first and foremost, I'm a Christian, and so I give all glory to God. I'm not here to glorify myself. I hope for the salvation of Dean and everyone watching. So whatever happens, I give all glory to God. And so I'm going to be reading an opening statement that I prepared. I think it's efficient for our time and for framing the discussion. So I'll be reading it out, and then we can jump right in. We're just doing open discussion after the opening statement. So here we go. According to Matthew 12:39 through 40, Jesus offered one sign to prove he was revealing God, his resurrection from the dead. So that's what I'll be defending today. We're not here to debate Old Testament ethics, biblical inerrancy, or another irrelevant topic that Dean may want to jump to. These are interesting and important topics, but not the subject of tonight's debate. I'm here to defend the truth of the resurrection and therefore God with a rigorous argument. And I want to be clear, this is an opening statement, so I'm going to be yapping, but I'm yapping important things, so pay attention. I don't know, can I do a green screen? I think I can, right?
Yeah, I can make you expand it as well.
It might be too small, though. Okay, you can't really see. I'm just going to keep it there, even though you can't really see.
No, I got you.
Okay, cool. So I'm just going to read it out. It's a deductive argument. Premise 1, there is testimony saying that Jesus was resurrected. Premise 2, this testimony comes from credible sources. Premise 3, there's only 3 logical possibilities with respect to credible testimony. It is true, it is deliberately false, or it is honestly mistaken. Premise 4, the credible testimony for the resurrection of Jesus is not deliberately false. Premise 5, the credible testimony for the resurrection of Jesus is not honestly mistaken. Premise 6, therefore the credible testimony for the resurrection of Jesus is true. Premise 7, if the credible testimony for the resurrection of Jesus is true, then Jesus was resurrected. Premise 8, therefore Jesus was resurrected. Premise 9, if Jesus was resurrected, then the God he revealed very probably exists. Premise 10, therefore the God Jesus revealed very probably exists.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to screenshot that, brother, and be able to pull it up so I could follow you here. Do you mind hopping out of the way just a second so I can take a screen? Just so I have that, so I don't lose you here. Sorry, go ahead and continue, man. I don't mean to interrupt your opening statement.
I don't take the most controversial premises to be 2. I take the most controversial premises to be 2, 4, and 5. So I'll spend most of my time defending them. Now I'll briefly touch on premise 9. To be clear, there's simply not enough time to dive into all the evidence and the nuance. For example, my paper on why I'm a Christian is 32 pages. But I can still give some strong reasons to believe they are true. So let's begin in order, starting with the second premise, that this testimony comes from credible sources. I define a credible source as a source from someone in a good position to know what actually happened, like by witnessing it directly or hearing about it directly from someone who did. The central sources are the writings of Paul, in particular 1 Corinthians, and the Gospels. Paul's authorship is rarely disputed, contrary to the Gospels, but we have good evidence for the traditional authorship. I will quickly go through it. Firstly, there are no anonymous copies of the 4 Gospels, and early Christians would have needed a reason to accept them and a way to differentiate them. Many people object that they do not identify themselves in the text, but this is true of many ancient historians like Tacitus and Plutarch. Secondly, there are strong and consistent external attestations of the traditional authors early on. This is stated universally with a geographical spread. This is in stark contrast to a truly anonymous book like the book of Hebrews. Thirdly, Mark and Luke weren't eyewitnesses or prominent in the early church, so it wouldn't make sense to invent them as authors unless there were good historical reason, like they actually were. Fourthly, the documents contain data consistent with the traditional authors. For example, Matthew, a tax collector, is focused on money. Mark, a disciple of Peter, emphasized Jewish custom and Peter. Luke, a doctor, was trained in physician terms, and John showed knowledge of Palestinian geography. And there's a lot more textbooky evidences I could go through to attest to the reliability. I'll go through them quickly as well. Firstly, Luke's approach to historical reportage is similar to other ancient historians like Thucydides and Josephus, and he also uses language suggesting an insider's perspective and authority like Demosthenes. I'm having trouble pronouncing these ancient names. Now, also in Acts, he uses the word we, suggesting personal involvement in events described. Secondly, historian Colin Himmer wrote a book that details 84 factual confirmations in the book of Acts. Just one example is a precise term for taking soundings and correct depth of water near Malta in Acts 27. Thirdly, the knowledge of personal names is congruent with the time and place known as in scholarship as onomastic congruence. For comparison, the Gospel of Judas, a late Gnostic gospel, has significant disparity. The contrast shows the reliability of the text. Lastly, I will just list more reasons we can further discuss if Dean wants to. The Gospels are biographies. Everybody historically understood them to be historical accounts. They contain embarrassing information. They contain historically oriented fulfillment of prophecy. They contain undesired coincidences, and they leave out non-historical information. Whoa! All right. I know that was a fire hose of information, but that's the reality of the evidence for the reliability of the Gospels. Thus, there are three logical possibilities. They were lying, mistaken, or telling the truth. Let's move on to the next controversial premise. It's deliberately false. I will give two main reasons against this. First, it seems that they had nothing to gain by lying. There's no obvious benefit to be gained by deliberately misleading people into believing that Jesus had been resurrected. Secondly, there was every reason not to lie about something like this. We know that early Christians faced intense persecution at the hands of the Romans. Paul describes that himself in his letters. Church history records that Paul, Matthew, and Mark were martyred. Generally speaking, one of the strongest human instincts is self-preservation. If the disciples really believed that Jesus was resurrected and that this ensured them eternal life, then their willingness to die for this belief is easy to explain. Next, if they aren't lying, then the next premise, perhaps they are mistaken. Dean can present a more detailed account if you like, and we can touch on that, but I'm going to attack the most popular class of explanations, that they are purely psychological factors. Firstly, it lacks an explanation of the empty tomb. They're at least genuinely believing their own reports. This means we would have to accept their witness to the fact that Jesus' tomb was really empty. This physical evidence can't be explained by a purely psychological hypothesis. Secondly, it would be an instance where everything we know about hallucinations would be contradicted, with individuals experiencing the same exceptionally rare polymodal hallucination over 40 days despite lacking anticipation of Jesus' resurrection. So it follows that the testimony is true. So Jesus rose. Ooh, that's hope. That's awesome. This provides the best explanation of the voluntary suffering, appearances of Jesus, women at the tomb, empty tomb, and immediate proclamation. I'm almost done. I know I'm speaking quickly. To briefly defend premise 9, that is, if Jesus was resurrected, then the God he revealed very probably exists. The justification comes from the context surrounding the life and ministry of Jesus. The resurrection of Jesus occurs in fulfillment of his prediction, and this was the one sign that he was from God. It functions as a vindication of his divine claims. That event, paired with a religious context, which includes a prediction of said resurrection as a sign of divine approval, warrants an inference to God action as the best explanation of said resurrection. Dean needs to propose a better explanation if he wants to deny this. I'd like to see him try. And even on top of that, there are good arguments for the existence of God, more generally, and arguments that this leads to predictions about an incarnation, resurrection, and atonement. See Richard Swinburne, a good philosopher. But I won't even get into that because I think the case I presented today in this opening statement is sufficient. So to wrap up, I remind you all of the type of argument I presented. It's a deductive argument. So that means if the premises are true, then the conclusion logically and inescapably follows regardless of how Dean feels. So Dean will need to show one of the premises to be false. If or when he fails to do that, you will know who won this debate. Now then, all right, Dean, let's hear it.
All right, Dean, on to you. You can start your opening statement. You can go for it. You can have your time. I don't think it's going to take very long, but go for it, man.
Perfect. So according to the Christian faith, God is a loving being that cares about us, but there are some people that are not cared about. I look at this world and I don't think that this is what we would expect if there was to be a being that existed without limitations that genuinely cared for us. For example, we have standards for parents. How do we know if we have a good parent or a bad parent? We look at how the child is treated. If the child is being starved, beaten, suffering from an illness that is curable, why would we say that that parent is good? In fact, we would probably say that parent is bad. Why wouldn't we have similar expectations for a God? If we would look at the child to determine if the parent is good, why wouldn't we look at creation to determine if the creator is good? We see horrible atrocities all throughout history. We often talk about the Holocaust. Excuse me. But there is other related atrocities that I bet you've never heard of. Like in World War II, nearly 200,000 non-Jewish Polish children were abducted from their homes merely because they looked German. And then they were turned into slaves, and they had medical experimentations ran on them, and the children labeled as racially valuable were forcefully assimilated into SS centers, re-educated, and then forcefully adopted out into German households. Those that did not have blonde hair and blue eyes were sent to Auschwitz to be starved, brutalized, and unalived. The parents of the abducted kids resisted their children being taken by the Nazis. Militias formed, mothers and fathers lost their own lives in attempts to protect the lives of their little ones. And what did God do? Let me ask you all this hypothetical question. If one of the parents had just simply allowed the SS soldiers to take their children, enslave their children, and run medical experiments on their children, even if it could be easily prevented, would we say that that is a good parent? I believe that everyone listening, including yourself, Brooks, would say no. And I'm not a Christian because I'm compelled to say the same thing about God. One might say that God did not intervene as this would forsake the free will of the Nazi soldiers. But what about the free will of the children? God could have either intervened and infringed upon the free will of the Nazi soldiers, or allowed them to continue, which led to them infringing upon the free will of one of the innocent children, turning them into slaves and test subjects for medical experimentation and so on. So whose free will do we value more? Whose free will should we value more, the Nazis or the victims of the Nazis? If Jesus was walking on the ground while those 200,000 children were being abducted, what would Jesus do? Would he join arms with the powerless Polish men and women attempting to prevent the SS soldiers from stealing the children that inevitably lost their lives in doing so? Or would the Nazi soldiers be ever so satisfied with Jesus sitting back and simply allowing these things to occur with God in complacency? More importantly, is free will even of concern? Can the free will of man thwart the plan and or the intention of God? Not according to Scripture. For prophet Isaiah said, "The Lord of hosts has sworn, as I have designed, so it shall be, and as I have planned, so it shall come to pass." Does this mean that God had planned the abduction of the 200,000 children, or their enslavement, brutalization, starvation, and deaths? Would you say that it is possible that God had good reason to allow for these things? Look, even if Jesus resurrected doesn't mean that he's a good God. I don't know what happened 2,000 years ago, but this doesn't get God off the hook for what happened to the Polish children. And if anything, when we're talking about premise 9 of your argument, the probability of Jesus' resurrection indicating that the Christian God exists, I think that there is some very large issues with the reconciling of the evil and suffering that exists in the world and what this would tell us about the special relationship that God has to the world.
All right, seems like we're done with the opening statements, everyone. We're going to move on to open discussion. I'm only going to step in on the basis of people like overcutting people off. All right, so I'm going to give it off to everyone. You guys can start wherever you guys would like. Go for it.
Yeah, so I'm curious, you said with premise 9, you question the probability of that statement. So is your only argument kind of this problem, the evil question?
Yeah, so when we're talking about the problem of evil, specifically the one that I'd posit, I think that there is some necessary concessions that you would have to make about the world around us in order for it to be congruent with a God, right? Especially a God that is all good. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and detail that issue to you. So I think, like, first of all, we must understand what exactly you take evil to be. I take evil to be something that shouldn't occur. Would you agree or disagree with this?
Why should I believe that?
Well, because that's how we understand bad things in normative ethics.
No, I don't think that's a good consensus. Like, for example, when we talk about like deontological ethics or utilitarian ethics, it's good or evil is determined based on if you're acting in accordance with your moral duty or acting that leads to more flourishing or more pleasure. And that's how we would define a good or bad.
Well, that's the deontological, sorry. So those are like the specific normative frameworks. So we could have different ways to determine what should or shouldn't occur. Like, for instance, a utilitarian might say what should occur is what maximizes the utility for all, while a deontic might say what should occur is the minimization of rights violations. But all things considered, right, normativity is just talking about oughts and ought nots. Sorry. So if something is good, it means it should happen, and something is bad if it shouldn't happen. So I just simply ask you in return, if you disagree with this idea, can you please give me an example of something that's good that shouldn't happen?
Well, do you think there's normativity that are not moral matters?
No.
For example, I ought to speak according to the rules of English grammar. Do you think that's a moral good?
So I think that there's different types of ought claims, but ought claims that pertain to normativity is specifically in the context of morality. Because an ought claim is just the evaluation.
That sounds redundant. You said ought claims that.
So there's moral oughts and non-moral oughts.
Ought claims that pertain to normativity.
Yeah, so there's like moral oughts and there's non-moral oughts, like epistemic oughts. Because all that an ought is the evaluation of a success-failure relationship. So if I make like a good move in chess, right, well then that is just the success of a success-failure relationship. It's like what I should do in accordance with my own values and preferences. But specifically when we're talking about God, you'd say that God's values and God's preferences and his will as a whole is literally the grounding for what is good. If God has a preference for something, it is good by virtue of God's preference. But see, the same thing can't be said about me. So yes, all of God's preferences would pertain to like moral ought claims. Meanwhile, mine not necessarily.
Okay,
I'll just simply ask you: would you agree that it's okay to say something is good if it should happen and something is bad if it shouldn't?
I'm not gonna answer like what my psychological position is. I'm asking you why I should think that. So when you say that good is what ought be done, it seems you're changing the definition. You think good is what morally ought to be done, but that seems circular.
Wait, we're talking about like moral ought claims. So if something is good, it means that it should be done in this like non-epistemic sense.
Okay, how do you define good?
So it's an internal critique. So this would be operating off of your notion of goodness.
And you're assuming that it's ought to be done, yeah, right?
Well, like regardless of what your specific normative framework is, at the end of the day, it will still just tell us what should be done. Like I'll just simply ask you, can you name something that is good that shouldn't be done?
Okay, for example, I'll bite even though I think there's some things I can push on. In philosophy, there's like scenarios called Sophie's Choice. And so this originally comes from a book or a movie. I'm actually not too familiar in the history. But basically the idea is that suppose that there are logically exhaustive options of two cases of evil, okay? And let's say in one instance it's lesser evil. So either you ought to either kill someone or kill 5 people. Okay, I think in this case you ought to kill one person.
You say you should kill one person instead of the 5.
Listen, you ought to kill one person. Does that mean killing one person is good in this case?
Well, if like if you're running like utilitarianism, you'd say it's good, all things considered, because the opposite is 5.
I thought it wasn't about normative frameworks.
Well, I'd have to imply normative framework in order to answer if it's good.
Then how do you expect me to answer the question if your blanket statement is that what good is what ought to be done?
Well, regardless of what your normative framework is, that's just what it tells us. So, like, for example, so like without like telling like me why it ought to be done, at the end of the day, it's still something that you think should occur. Like, for instance, do you think people should or shouldn't sin?
I think people should not sin.
Because it's bad to sin, right? So bad things tell us what shouldn't occur.
That doesn't prove that they're identical.
So would you be okay? So I want you to go ahead and give me an instance of something that would fall outside of this case, right?
I just gave you.
I'll
give you another example.
So name something that is good that shouldn't happen. Like because if you say like let me touch on your specific example. Because you gave me
let's let Brooks respond real quick.
Real quick, I'll give you an example. You asked me a question. Okay. So I can flip it. Let's say this. I think it is so good. I think it is so good to give up your life, become a doctor, go to the middle of nowhere. It is so good to do that. But I also think it's good to become a firefighter, just like live very modestly, donate all your money. Would you say in both cases you ought to? It seems like a contradiction because
those are epistemic ought claims. When we're particularly talking about
epistemic ought claims.
Yeah, when we're talking about like
what about that was epistemic?
Yeah, they're good because they're in accordance with your preference. For instance, if I don't have a preference for becoming a firefighter, then would it be good in this practical sense for me to become a firefighter?
What are you talking about? Okay, when I say it's good, this is not an epistemic claim. When I
So
say
you're talking about moral claims.
go ahead. When you say epistemic ought, what does that mean?
So it's just like in accordance with my preference or some type of success-failure relationship is present. Like for instance, if I'm playing chess with a friend, like I should like checkmate their king, right? But when I'm saying that I should checkmate their king, I'm not saying that it would be morally good for me to checkmate their king, right? These ought claims are pertaining to knowledge, like what you should believe, right?
Do you
But
think
I do just want to clear this up, right? I do just want to clear this up. So when we are talking about like these shouldn't claims only in the context of morality, right? There's other shouldn't claims that don't pertain to morality. When we're talking about the problem of evil, we're only talking about morality. And I just want to agree on a conceptual basis with you. So if something is good, it means it should happen, right? In this moral sense. If something is bad, it means it shouldn't happen in a moral sense. So I'll just simply ask you if you agree or disagree with me. Because if you disagree with me, I'll ask you to not red herring me by bringing up these other senses of shoulds
red
and
herring.
shouldn'ts.
You're the one that asked me the questions. What do you mean red herring? Okay, I'll answer the question again. When I say that, you said give me an example that's good, but you ought not do it. And so I gave you an example of firefighter and doctor. Okay, and
Can you explain that to me?
Real quick. Epistemology is about knowledge. Okay. And so when we're talking about morality, I'm using a framework. And so you said, tell me that something is good that you ought not do. And I said, a doctor or a firefighter, give your life, donate all of your money. And so that was not an epistemic ought. That was a moral ought. And so this contradicts your view because...
Wait, so I asked you for an example that is morally good, but shouldn't occur in then firefighters and doctors. I don't see how that pertains. Maybe you could explain to me.
Okay,
But,
I mean, I can explain
for
it, so-
instance, in the case of the firefighter and doctor, you might have compelling reasons, but what you should do is what you have the most reason to do, right? So like, for instance, when you granted me the idea of unaliving one person or unaliving 5 people, we'd say you should unalive the one person because you have the most reason to unalive the one person, because in doing so, you're saving 4 other lives, right? So like, for instance, I'll give you an example of this. When I get a vaccine, there's a little bit of pain, thank you for the galaxy, of the needle entering into my arm, right? But we'd say that I should experience that pain because all things considered, that is going to yield me the great benefit of being vaccinated to COVID or something along those lines, right? And then I just simply ask you, would it be bad for God to take away our free will?
Real quick, I'm not gonna, we're going to keep going on this.
Can I demonstrate it to you?
In order for me to go down this line, we need to finish this debate about what good is. And so, yes, I think in that case, you ought to do it and it is good, but that's a non sequitur. It doesn't logically follow that you ought to do all good things.
No, that's not the claim that I'm making.
That's literally what you define good as, or what oughtness was.
So something is good if like you should do it, something is bad if you shouldn't do it, but you also have things that are merely permissible that would be amoral in a sense.
Okay,
But like that's just like not relevant to the problem of evil.
that's going against your claim. What do you say? I'm interacting.
What are the other 3 options?
You haven't given an argument that's not a non sequitur.
Thank you so much for the Rose
Dean,
Nebula.
Dean, let's let him speak real quick.
What is that, bro? Yeah, so I don't think... Oh, open chat on accident. I don't think you've given an argument that's not a non sequitur and why you should define good that way.
Wait, I'm so sorry. I'll just simply ask you. So yeah, we're talking about axiology here. Like essentially, like the implicit statement that you're making is I'm imposing my values onto you, right? So I'll just simply ask you here. When we're talking about morality, something is either obligatory, merely permissible. Thank you, Rachel. Let that go through. Or impermissible. Are there any other options when we're talking about good in a normative notion?
No, but I'm not sure how that's relevant to your claim.
Wait, okay, answer my question and I'll explain its relevance.
You're equivocating deontology and axiology. I don't know why we should identify it.
I'm asking you a question. If we're talking about good in a normative notion, something is either obligatory, merely permissible, or impermissible.
Okay.
You agree to that, right? So, and something is obligatory if it's something that you should do. Do you agree to that?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Okay, and something is merely permissible if you can do it. It's not necessarily the case that you should or shouldn't, correct?
Okay.
And something is impermissible if it's something you shouldn't do.
Okay.
So then earlier when you're telling me that good doesn't necessarily reflect what you should do, you were lying.
No, that certainly doesn't follow. Like you didn't respond to either of my counterexamples.
Wait, no, you just agreed though. You just said something is obligatory
does
if it's
not
something you
follow
should
at
do.
all.
You said something is merely permissible if it's something that you can do, and something is impermissible if it's something that you shouldn't do. Something's good if you should do it.
doesn't-
Something's bad if you shouldn't do it. You
follow
just
that it's
agreed.
synonymous.
Wait, I'm so sorry. What are the other options here?
Even if it's logically exhaustive.
That's not another option.
I don't think good means obligatory.
I mean, so something, okay, can something be good that's merely permissible?
Can you break that down? What do you mean by that?
Something is merely permissible if you don't have a reason to do it, or you don't have a reason to not do it, right? But can something be good without any justifying moral reason?
I'm not sure. I mean, like, I think, like, for example, like, consciousness is good.
Okay, but that's probably a practical sense of good. Are you saying that we should have consciousness?
Well, that sneaks in your presupposition that goodness is oughtness.
Okay, listen, so...
Real quick, wait, real quick. I'll concede. We can move on. I don't want to impede this about the definition. I'll concede good is what you ought to do. I don't want to impede progress.
Wait, would you say, so just
What are
like
you
real
reading?
quick, I've notes on my computer here to do with my opening statement. But just like real quick, so when we're talking about the Polish children, as I detailed in the context of my opening statement, do you think that's something that should happen or that's something that shouldn't happen?
With respect to what?
Fuck morality, brother.
No, I'm saying, like, for example, like, this has implications for the problem of evil. I don't think that should happen.
Wait, don't anticipate the argument. We'll get there. Listen, I think we could actually have a good conversation. We could get somewhere if you just won't anticipate the argument. We could actually have a really productive dialogue here and try to evaluate truth. But let's just, figure out the conceptual underlying basis here.
Okay, so
The Holocaust.
I'll
Should the
answer the
Holocaust happen or shouldn't the Holocaust happen?
In isolation, it should not happen.
In isolation, it should not happen. And would you say that's because in isolation it's evil?
Yes.
So something is evil if it shouldn't
That
happen?
doesn't logically follow.
So can something be evil even if it shouldn't happen?
We already went over this, but like I said, I'll concede.
I think it does logically
Listen,
follow.
No, it doesn't.
I think it absolutely does logically follow.
Let's let Brooks finish real quick.
One example does not prove they're synonymous. But like I said, I'll concede. Let's say yes. In this case, yes.
Okay, so something is evil
We
if it
can
shouldn't
vote.
happen. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I'll
I'll just simply ask you. So all things considered, should the Holocaust have occurred?
All things considered, what? What are you considering?
Like all the given facts.
I think the language is ambiguous. I think all things considered, with respect to God, I think God ought to allow it. But all things considered with respect to the act or what happened, I think it should not happen. Or ought
Do you
not
think
happen.
that? Okay, yeah, I have a question. So yeah, that was not the question. All things considered, is the
Yeah,
Holocaust?
sometimes you ask questions and they need elaboration and it's ambiguous, so I can elaborate on it. Yeah.
So I don't think that was ambiguous at all. All things considered, should the Holocaust have occurred?
But it's not clear. Should. Should it usually refers to like agents. What are you referring to? Should with respect to what?
What do you, with like respect to a success failure relationship on what's good or bad?
Distinction with should.
Wait, I have a question. Does God allow things that all things considered shouldn't happen?
Are you just like reading something? What are you reading?
No, I look off screen when I debate. I do this all the time. I
Yeah, but I guess like you're reading Discord or something, but I don't want to accuse you, but that's my impression.
Okay, so I mean, if you're just gonna make baseless claims, it's kind of embarrassing for you. I'm not reading.
Well, it just seems like you're looking at. Okay, anyways, we can move on.
I just look away when I think. Anyone
Okay,
that
no
watches my
problem.
lives. One second. No. Anyone that watches my lives can agree to this in the chat.
Okay, cool. I mean,
One second. Can we get some ones in the chat? Like I'm
Awesome.
always looking away when I'm debating.
okay.
I can't actually attest that he does do that, but Dean, you should keep your eyes closed.
Closed. No, dude, you can look wherever you want. No problem. I
Rachel,
just
I
thought it
appreciate
was-
you. So yeah, do you think that God would allow things in which all things considered shouldn't occur?
all things shouldn't occur. I mean, it just depends what you're referring to.
I'm asking you if there's like any case where this would occur. Would God like allow it?
kind of odd, right?
Girl, out of all people, talking about YDP.
Oh, Pluto might be off.
I am an op.
Whose server dish so, bruh? Who is that?
What are you talking about?
Oh, I'm looking at different. I'm looking at different server. Hold on. Oh,
That's crazy.
Okay, you're good. Okay,
gotta
speak your
reload.
mind.
hello.
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 Oh, Dean is such a fucking faggot. That was insane. That it. Oh my fuck. That irritated me so fucking bad. Like
Wait, is the live over? Yeah, it got banned.
Parker. Oh, I fucking hate Parker's twink ass, dude. He